Throw a chair through a window and call it a day. By Jaded Ghoster. Read by Rat Overlord. Chapter 5. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Summary. Aizawa and Midoriya's fourth course of action, social awareness and villain psychology. Shota knew what he was getting into as soon as he chose to be an underground hero rather than a spotlight hero, even if he didn't really have a choice with a quirk like his. He knew that he wouldn't be dealing with those big, flashy villains that flew around with capes and shot lasers at people like the ones in the movies, or rather, the ones All Might used to deal with before Kamino. After all, what's the point of operating in the dark when the person you're chasing is trying to shine as bright as a nuclear bomb? Still, that's not to say he doesn't get his fair share of criminals. He wouldn't call his night shift police officers friends, but they were far from strangers. He'll bet that by now, all of them have seen him trudge into their station at 2 a.m., hunched and panting, dragging a bruised and unconscious body of a villain. Twice. He doesn't want to know how each of them felt the first time they saw it, but he guessed it must have been pretty disturbing. But that's beside the point. Deli robberies, alley muggings, attempted murder, actual murder, and even vigilantism? He's seen it all. He works under the cold blanket of night, taking care of all the nitty-gritty crimes that daylight heroes can't be bothered to think about, that no one else seems to think about either. And despite how the crimes all differ from each other, Shota knows the culprits all share one thing: a motive. No one does something for no reason. There's always some sort of butterfly effect going on in their lives that led them to that moment. The man robbing the deli because his boss screwed him out of his job and he needed money to support his children. The teenager who held a knife to a woman's throat and screamed for her wallet because he was kicked out of his home and hadn't eaten in 2 days. The young girl who swung a bat at her stepdad's head because he had been nothing but abusive since he moved in. The teenage boy that grabbed a hoodie and a mask to fight crimes on the street, all because he had no chance of becoming a hero with a quirk like his that society just can't seem to accept. And, Jesus Christ, Shota, just shut up. But yeah, you get the point. And even though all of this doesn't make what they did right, it does help a person to understand that at the end of the day, they're just humans. Humans who made a mistake when they were all backed into a corner and left with seemingly no other options. Of course, one could argue that this only applies to the small-time villains, whatever they consider small, that is, and that the major ones, who manage yakuzas and blow up cars in a traffic jam just for the hell of it, are simply psychotic. And you know what? He agrees. It's psychotic and scary, but still, one has to ask the question of why. Why did they go insane? What was the last straw? Who made them snap? They're uncommon questions, but questions nonetheless. Important ones, too. And Shota wishes that more people would ask them instead of completely bypassing them and jumping to conclusions. He wished the victims themselves would ask the questions too, since apparently no one was going to do that for them. They need a push in the right direction to do it, though, because it's harder than most people think to get the help you require. Hopefully, what he's doing today is the little shove that these kids need. But anyway, it's not like he can blame society for not asking. After all, it's how the majority of the population was raised. They grew up believing that the world was just black and white, good and evil, hero and villain. And they refuse to have their beliefs shaken because they know it'll only cause themselves harm. It's kind of like what he said a couple days ago during his inner monologue. You take what's given to you and you don't question it, or else you'll learn the dirty little truths that your conscience tried to shield you from. However, beyond the dominating yings and yangs, there lies a small little space in between, the space he's talking about when he mentions all of these motives. A gray area that the not-quite heroes and the not-quite villains toe the perimeter of. He wanted more people to pay attention to that area, to look not only at the big picture, but at each pixel that made it up. More people like Netsu. like Shota. A scribbling sound from the left side of his desk draws the underground hero's attention, and he's left staring at the scene of his green-eyed student, jotting notes down in his 7th notebook with his tongue poked out in extreme concentration. More people, like Midoriya.
Young Aizawa!
Jesus Christ, he can't have a moment of quiet, can he? Puffing out a hot breath of air, Shota turned to the former symbol of peace.
When Kayama and Majima told me that you were making your way around the staff room for one-on-one meetings, I didn't quite believe them, but...
A bead of sweat rolled down All Might's face, and the Erasure hero slightly smirked. Is he scared? How interesting.
Making my way around, huh? Yeah. Anyway...
All Might tensed at his lack of an answer.
This meeting isn't actually related to you at all. We just need to talk through you to someone else.
No matter how much the blonde buffoon irritated him, he can't deny that the man definitely had connections from his time as the #1 hero. A single bad review from the guy could ruin your entire career, maybe even your family's too. Not that he would ever do that, though. The guy's too nice to realize his own power.
Oh!
His relief was palpable, but Shota could tell that he was trying his hardest to hide it. He guessed he should be flattered.
Well, in that case, who is it?
The underground hero sighed.
Detective Tsukauchi.
Truth be told, he could always just talk to the man himself. After all, every time he dragged said criminal's body through the doors of the police station, Tsukauchi was the one who made sure no one mistook him for a villain instead. Being the underground hero he was, half of his job included some things a little more major than regular petty crime. And during all of those instances, whether it be party crashing a drug raid or infiltrating a corrupt company with a false identity, Tsukauchi was always the one by his side. So yeah, they definitely had a strong work relationship that was built on mutual trust and respect. But that's only when it came to hero work. When it came to the more complex matters like, tearing a hero school to the ground, the detective made it as clear as possible that he wanted nothing to do with Aizawa and whatever logical ruse he was planning. But All Might? The two were besties. He didn't exactly know why, but yeah.
Naomasa?
See, first name basis, his plan was already working.
I don't understand. Don't you interact with him almost every week?
Well, someone was bound to ask.
Yes, but unfortunately, he wouldn't go near my request with a 10-foot pole. You, on the other hand...
Is he being manipulative? Yes. Does he care? Slightly. But only because he knows the detective is going to get petty revenge on him if he ever finds out what he did.
What exactly is the request?
Yagi asked in a wavering voice.
I need access to a specific type of criminal files, as much as he can offer without making it seem suspicious.
Okay, well, he probably could have phrased that better.
Criminal files? Define what you mean by specific type. Wait, no. Why do you need them at all?
Shota opened his mouth to reply, but shut it just as fast. Yes, he could give a lengthy answer and waste his breath trying to dumb it down for All Might. Or he can snap his fingers at the analytical green bean next to him and allow the kid to let out the mumblings that he has been repressing ever since Shota told him the plan. Yeah, he'll go with the latter. Plus, it's been a day since he last did it, and he's getting quite antsy as it was quickly becoming his new favorite thing to do. Shota did the snapping, pointing gesture at Midoriya and smirked as the kid shot up in his seat, a gleam in his eye.
It's for Social Awareness Day.
Midoriya did a small jazz hands motion.
It's about 4 hours. All of the students will be gathered in the assembly for a mandatory presentation on villain psychology. Normally, you'd think that only Hero Course students would need to see this, but this is a matter that involves everyone. It'll be on the villain's crimes, their motives, their personal life, their work life, their school life, whether or not they should actually be defined as a villain, and so on.
Now that the kid says it, it's quite a long list. How long is this presentation going to be again? Do they have enough time to... Scratch that. Of course they do. Midoriya always has his supernatural way of accomplishing things that no one else should be able to.
Villain psychology? You want the students to try and understand the villains?
There was an unknown emotion lacing All Might's voice, one that the underground hero didn't know how to feel about. One thing's for sure, though, if the emotion was anything sort of negative.
Yep, no one is inherently evil. There is always an abundance of circumstances that caused them to do what they did.
Jesus Christ, is this kid actually a mind reader? This shouldn't be normal.
The goal of the presentation is to make others realize that, and that way they can learn how to prevent these sorts of things from happening to other people. After all, it's better to nip the problems in the bud rather than watch them fester. I see.
There it is again, that little edge of emotion in All Might's voice. Except this time it didn't stop there. The man's usually hollow eyes began to shine in icy blue. His slouching form morphed into something more confident as he slightly rolled his shoulders back, and the concerned frown lifted to a small smile. Shota doubted that anyone else would have noted the change, but he did, and he could say with 100% certainty that the mystery emotion wasn't disappointment or disgust. It was pride. Pride for Midoriya, to be exact. Not that the erasure hero is surprised. Everyone in the staff room has seen the expression on All Might's face before, especially when it came to the kid. Hell, they've probably felt it themselves at one point, and it was getting easier and easier to tell lately since Aizawa had been feeling it himself. What?
In that case, I assume you need the files for the examples of said villains?
All Might continued.
I already have some of the more well-known villains, like Toga Himiko, Twice, Dabi.
God, he hopes Todoroki doesn't kill him for this.
Spinner, Stain.
He hopes Ida doesn't kill him for this.
Shigaraki, and so on. But for this to work, I can't just have the major ones. I need the small-time ones too. So about your last question, for what Aizawa-sensei means by specific type, there are quite a few factors. Criminals that have a quirk which someone might describe as villainous, ones that have a history of bullying claims in school, ones who have filed abuse claims for their home but went unchecked, and ones who seem to have been in financial debt of any sort.
As far as Shota could tell, those were the 4 major motives of the villainous world, but Midoriya wasn't done.
Oh, and just anyone quirkless.
The child said so innocently. For a split second, time felt like it froze for Shota, but that wasn't a particularly bad thing. He wanted Midoriya to include the quirkless. He wanted him to understand that no matter how much he downplays his time as a late bloomer, it had a tremendous effect on him. The point of Social Awareness Day was exactly as the green-haired child had said, but that didn't mean that the underground hero didn't have a few ulterior motives of his own. He promised himself that he was going to help these kids, Midoriya, Todoroki, Shinso, and anyone else who needs it, which is most likely a lot. But like he had said last time, he can't be too upfront about it and just shove some facts in their face. That would scare them away. For one of the first times in his teaching career, logic isn't going to solve this. He needs his students to find the strength to ask for help on their own. To realize that just because they were strong enough to endure the things, although he doesn't know exactly what that is yet, that happened to them, that didn't make any of it okay. And these presentations are the perfect excuse for that, since he and Midoriya were already planning it in the first place. Time kept moving as quickly as it had stopped.
You're right. That's quite a hefty amount. Are you sure you'll be able to go through all the files, choosing the people that you want to talk about, and merge them into your speech all within the time limit of a few hours?
All Might asked, a tad bit concerned, but Shota could tell that feeling washed away as soon as the kid flashed a predatory smile with excitement and determination pooling in the forest hues of his eyes. The glorified skeleton smiled. He really is proud of him for everything he does, huh? Once again, not judging, and pulled out his phone.
In that case, I'll call Namaso right away. Just be aware that it may take a little under an hour for one of the officers to get you the files that you need.
The blonde-haired man was about to hit the call button, but paused for a second. Jesus Christ, what is with all these pauses today?
If you don't mind me asking, why would Naomasa not have faith in your request?
Oh, right. He didn't tell All Might the reason why his relationship with the detective was strictly professional. He didn't tell Midoriya either, which is pretty weird since he thought the kid would ask at some point. When he told his student that Tsukauchi wouldn't trust any request that came from Shota, the kid hadn't even questioned it, just immediately moved on to finding a solution. He can't be that blindly trusting, can he? And furthermore, he agreed when Shota said that All Might would have a better chance as if he'd known about the two's friendship, which is weird, right? That's weird. In any case, he might as well answer to set the record straight.
The last time he did, Vlad wouldn't look at him for a month. All of his rolling chairs were vandalized by being covered in fake blood, and his windows had the words "Red Rum" on it. Once again, in fake blood.
The blonde-haired man gave him a wide-eyed stare, and even his student spared a glance from his notebook to look a tad bit horrified. Shota rolled his eyes.
What? I'm just gonna call.
The former symbol of peace went back to his phone, Midoriya went back to his writing, and Shota continued to drink his coffee in the tense silence. Peace and quiet. Shota watched in silence from the back corner of the room, his presence cloaked by the shadows as students began filing into the auditorium seats. The speech preparation was a tad bit more grueling than he had originally assumed, but nothing he and the kid couldn't handle. The one thing they almost weren't able to handle, though, was keeping a straight face at Tsukauchi's suspicious tone as his voice filtered through the call's speakers. All Might had asked him for the files, which then resulted in a not-so-subtle interrogation over why he needed them at all. Something a little more specific than UA business. The detective had probably heard the first syllable of the school's name and immediately had war flashbacks to the last time he had been involved in the heroics teacher's logical ruses. And thank God Shota and Midoriya were able to write down excuses and cover stories for All Might to use, or else Tsukauchi would have blocked all three of their numbers and never looked back. In the end, they got what they needed, so that's all that really matters. Although that wasn't where their slight misfortune ended. After a couple cross-referencing among the criminal cases, as well as background checks to make sure the information was not only correct, but also not out of context, the principal and secretary duo were left with one more conundrum, and that was the question of who was going to present this whole thing anyway. Midoriya had the audacity to take the notebook containing the speech and computer containing the PowerPoint and slide it over to Shota, as if the black-haired man would ever be caught dead participating in a public speaking event. The underground hero had then narrowed his eyes and slid the items back over the desk to the kid, who said, as if I'd ever be caught dead directing a speech at people a year younger and a year older than me. There's only room for one age group. Shota didn't exactly understand what he meant by the last statement, but he was determined to win. Shota argued that if he was the one speaking, it'd be identical to a class lecture, which no one would pay attention to. Midoriya rebuked the statement by saying that if he were the one speaking, he'd stutter so much that people would give up even looking at him. The underground hero said that, as the principal, he had the authority to give the kid the responsibility. The kid then shot back that, as the principal, this was his responsibility. It went on like that for a little while, and it probably would have gone on even longer if their 30-minute warning alarm hadn't gone off during the climax. And when he says climax, he means Midoriya was about to give a supercharged flick to his favorite coffee mug, and Shota was a second away from using his mini machete to slit the neck of the kid's Chibi Mirako keychain. The heroics teacher, realizing they were making no real progress and that time was running out, finally found a new way of winning. Shota said that since there was absolutely no way he'd ever take a step on that stage, there were two ways he could compromise. The first way, they could force All Might to make the speech. It'd be easy enough to inspire, or guilt trip, him into doing it, and it was guaranteed that the kids would give the former #1 hero their full attention. They'd probably take his word as gospel, too. The only downside was that Yagi was physically incapable of teaching without checking flashcards, stuttering, and coughing out blood. Plus, he couldn't actually relate to the things said in the presentation, and that would just make the people who needed to hear it hurtfully resigned. Yeah, they quickly tossed that idea to the side. The second way, Midoriya could do it. Yeah, his mug got quite a few death threats at that. If the kid were to do it, Shota promised that he could use an earpiece to ask the man for advice, just in case a student caused a ruckus or asked a particularly difficult question. He also promised that if the situation became too dire, Shota would just pull the fire alarm and bolt out of there with the rest of the school, effectively ending Social Awareness Day. The green-eyed kids still didn't look too convinced, so Shota raised the bid a little more. He'd get a piece of hero merchandise of his choice. He'd never seen a student accept so fast. And that brings him to the present moment, listening to the business course debating over what heroes would be nice to work with, the support kids telling wild tales of their latest lab explosion, and the Gen Ed students complaining about Bakugo, the hero kids complaining about Bakugo, and panicked rambling in his ear. Oh right, the panicked rambling in his ear.
Midoriya,
Shota said through the earpiece, lifting his eyes to face the stage, specifically the person on it. The green-haired child had apparently just finished setting up the screen projector for the slideshow and was now waving his arms around to capture his teacher's attention.
What's happening? Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's kind of loud in here, and the presentation is supposed to start in just under a minute, but I don't think they'll be able to hear me start over the talking, even with my mic.
Ah, yes, the struggles of grabbing teenagers' attention. Usually, he'd just activate his quirk and glare at them till they quieted down, but there were hundreds of kids in there, and the majority of them wouldn't even notice the faint red shine of his eyes or his floating hair.
Well, giving them a hard look won't work, so you're gonna have to gain their attention some other way.
Let's see, what other intimidation techniques could apply to this scenario?
This may sound a bit unrefined, but the only other way would be to create a loud noise or a bright light, preferably both at once, and even better, scare them so badly they'll be too on edge to risk looking away. Oh, okay.
Jesus, so blindly trusting.
But I don't really know how. You judge from past experiences and be resourceful.
Shota stated helpfully.
Well, Kacham does it by screaming and exploding things, but I don't exactly have any grenades on me. Endeavor is constantly fuming and on fire, but that's not the image I'm trying to portray right now. All Might doesn't even have to try.
Doesn't he know it?
Hawks has wings, so he can just fly. I don't even know why I consider that. Last time the only thing you did was throw a Oh!
Shota froze, immediately catching the attention of his two extroverted friends.
Midoriya, what are you planning on doing?
He asked quickly.
You'll see.
Jesus Christ, problem child, that's not an answer. The earpiece then made a small beeping noise, signaling that the kid had disconnected the call. Shota cursed and pushed off the spot where he was leaning against the wall, ignoring Zashi's and Nemori's looks of concern. The kid wasn't going to do what the underground hero thought he was going to do, right? But as soon as a small hint of that same toxic color entered his view, he knew he was. At that moment, everyone in the auditorium turned their heads in time to see a flash of green lightning on stage. Viridian sparks, crackling with pure, unadulterated power, zipped towards the nearest largest object, which, of course, it was a goddamn chair. The chair creaked as it was lifted into the air by scarred hands, wielded for just 2 milliseconds before suddenly soaring through the air and crashing out of the fucking window, shattering the glass into millions of pieces as the large gust of wind broke out through the room. Silence. Complete and utter silence was the only thing left in the auditorium, interrupted only by Zashi's barely restrained wheezing, Nemuri's high-pitched "aww," and the sound of Vlad signing his own will. But that wasn't even the best part. No, the best part was that everyone were focusing their wide-eyed, stunned stares on Midoriya. Midoriya, in his super-strength, bushy-haired glory, smiled.
Welcome to Social Awareness Day. I'm Isuku Midoriya, and today we're going to be discussing the psychology of villains.
And before he knew it, Shota was grinning.
Would you steal a loaf of bread in order to feed your family?
Isuku states, his voice captivating and calm as he addresses the audience. The same words are written on the slide projected behind him.
An age-old mantra that's been asked millions of times before as an accurate depiction of an ethical dilemma. On one hand, you could choose not to and remain an upstanding citizen who abides by the law, but at the cost of your starving, dying family. On the other hand, you could steal that loaf of bread, keep your family alive and healthy, but forever live with the knowledge that you have committed a crime and now must go on as a criminal in the eyes of the public. So how about it? Show a raise of hands for those who would steal at their loved one's expense.
After a few seconds, a few hesitant hands lifted, which then sparked a flame for everyone else. Even the hero students and teachers had a go at it. Isuku smiled.
I thought as much. I can't blame you, though. No one can. After all, it's what most of us would do in a desperate situation. We'd ignore the rules just to accomplish what we need to be done. It's just human nature.
Isuku paused for effect as his smile became a bit more predatory.
So what makes villains any different?
Outbursts broke out among the crowd, people yelling out protests of what they thought was rightful indignation. Terms, "excuse me," and "villains," and "what are you implying?" were the loudest of all. Finally, a brave student stood up with his hand raised, a frown on his face telling the green-haired boy that he clearly had something to say. So he pointed at the boy and nodded, signaling for him to speak.
I'm sorry, but are you really comparing us to villains?
Ugh, the stupidity of some people. Hey, wait a second. Since when did he start speaking like Aizawa-sensei?
No, I'm comparing you to fellow human beings.
Isuku rolled his eyes, ignoring the boy's offended squawk.
In any case, I guess the question is pretty easy to answer when the stakes for stealing the bread isn't that high. At most, if you get caught, you'll be banned from the store, a small price to pay for the life of your family. So let's change the question up then, shall we?
The One-for-All user strode across to the opposite side of the stage, still speaking.
Let's say, I don't know, your father was dying of an extreme disease that has destroyed the majority of his lungs function.
Another burst of noise, most coming from how blunt he was about such a horrible subject. He can't blame them. He shocked even himself with his nonchalant tone.
You want your dad to live? You're going to need a lung transplant. Unfortunately, those aren't so easy to come by. Now, you could put your father on the waiting list, or...
Isuku was cut off by a shrill sound.
Yes, put the father on the waiting list! There shouldn't be a second option! This way is the most effective and ethical way to help the father!
And she couldn't have raised her hand, either. The One-for-All user held back a groan of annoyance and vaguely wondered if this is what Aizawa-sensei felt like whenever Vlad-sensei opened his mouth. At that thought, he risked a glance towards his grumpy teacher, immediately noticing the not-so-subtle irritation on his face that was directed at the girl. Well, it's nice to know that he's not being dramatic over the interruption.
Is it effective? After all, he's sitting at the bottom of the list under hundreds, if not thousands, of other patients. It'll be a miracle if any organ donors are available to him while he's still alive, let alone be the same type as him. And furthermore, is it actually ethical? Because now you know that your father's chance of survival is slim to none, yet you still place him on this list and do nothing else to help him.
He saw a dawning realization take over the face of not just the girl, but the students around her, too. Some still looked a little unconvinced, though, so he figured it was time to get to the point.
There is, however, another way to help him. No matter what, you're going to be on the wait list, but it's commonly known that the more money you have, the higher your placement. So, if you want him in first place, I'd estimate about 11 million yen.
Gasps broke out, as well as a familiarly preppy voice shouting,
Bitch, I'm broke!
He's pretty sure he knows who that came from.
Exactly. No average person would have that much money just lying around. But you have to get the money no matter what. So, what do? You hatch a plan with a couple of other thugs, and you go and rob a bank.
Objection! There has to be another way to get that money. Maybe just pick up a couple more jobs?
Ida yelled out desperately. Iseku can't say he's surprised, but he can definitely say he's feeling nostalgic. It's like he's getting flashbacks to the first time he saw Ida at the entrance exam.
Pick up a couple more jobs? But how much do your quick jobs pay per hour? Probably not a lot. It'll take months, if not years, to get the money that you need. And by then, it'll already be too late. So now, I'll ask you the question. Would you rob a bank to help your father get a lung transplant?
He finally stopped pacing back and forth to stare at the audience, an expectant look on his face. It took a while, much longer than the first time, but eventually a single hand raised from Uraraka, and just like that, it spread like wildfire. 2 hands, then 3, then 10, then 30. Then suddenly the whole room was nothing but a sea of people willing to do anything for their family. Of course, there were some people who refused to give in, but, oh well, he can't just force people to change their morals. In all honesty, he expected more people to be like that. Guess he underestimated the school.
Well, I'm glad the majority of you think that way.
And in a split second, his friendly aura was gone, replaced with something much too predatory for his liking as he smirked at the audience.
Because that's exactly what happened to our dear friend and official villain, Kenji Mariko.
An image of a brown-haired boy, no older than 17, popped up on the screen behind the green-haired student. Kenji had a bright smile on his face as he ate what appeared to be cold soba, sitting at a restaurant table with his sister, mother, and father, blissfully unaware of the dark turn his life was about to take. Iseku carefully observed the reactions of his peers as they stared behind him with wide eyes and opening and closing jaws. He knew the scenario he created was high stakes and extreme, but everyone in here had been under the impression that he was purposely making it that dramatic, as if it wasn't realistic. An ignorant move on their part, really, and no, he wasn't trying to trick them. After all, he gave them the details, and not once had he ever used the word hypothetical. Now that he thinks about it, it sounds like a logical ruse. Because now they're faced with the photo of a boy, a student that could have been any one of them who had gone through this situation, and he's painted as a villain, someone evil and disgusting, when really he was just a doting son. This wasn't a hypothetical for him, and none of them should ever see it that way.
Now, can anyone tell me what the 2 types of motives are?
Shota smirked in his small corner of the room, sipping the iced coffee he bribed 13 to get him. He would have gotten it himself. Lord knows he's only comfortable when he takes his own order, but he'd rather die than miss this absolute shit show of Social Awareness Day. The kid had already gained their attention when he threw the chair through the window. Yeah, Shota still hasn't forgotten that, and honestly, he never wants to. But his speech is what kept it. Also, how did he not stutter once during this whole thing? Starting off with Kenji was pretty extreme, but the Erasure hero would be lying if he said it wasn't effective. It unraveled their rose-tinted view of the world with just one tug of a string, and after that, they were much more open to hearing the rest of Midoriya's speech. But that didn't stop their eyes from getting wider and wider with every single word. It was pretty funny by the underground hero standards. His green-haired student spoke of the first kind of motives, which were for the sake of others. It was simple, and summarized it pretty nicely, But Shota was still very disturbed over how the kid had the exact same thought process as he did this morning. For the sake of others was the more selfless end of the criminal spectrum, like Kenji. Midoriya gave examples of villains who were backed into a corner for money, paying their daughter's tuition fees, hiring a lawyer to win a custody battle, acquiring the funds to get a specific medical treatment for their husband, or just getting enough money to scrape by on the street. Anything you could think of, it was in one of those files, and, by default, in the kid's PowerPoint, all of which ended in some sort of tragedy. Dying by an officer's gun while robbing a store, getting a long sentence in prison for distributing illegal substances, or getting sent to juvie after being caught pickpocketing. Now, I'm not saying this excuses their actions, 'cause it doesn't. They've committed these crimes, and no matter how much sympathy anyone has, they have to serve their time. Is the problem child reading his mind? He has to be. This has gone past the line of what Shota can call a coincidence.
But it does help us understand why they did it and how they weren't pure evil, just desperate. Of course, it'd be pretty meaningless to tell you all of this and not explain how we should all try to do something about it.
A magenta-haired girl somewhere in the crowd of hellspawns raised all 4 of her hands, and Shota had never been so thankful for something so minor. He made a mental reminder to make another assembly sometime this week to educate these kids about the importance of waiting your turn to speak. Without any more wait, Midoriya called on her.
No offense, but I don't think we can stop it. We can't get rid of other people's debts. They're supposed to pay it off themselves. Once again, I'm not really trying to sound rude. I just don't think we understand.
That's a good point, actually. Shota didn't read the entire speech, so technically he had no idea where his student was going with this, but Midoriya simply nodded.
No, you understand perfectly. Unfortunately, as you said, there are some crimes that can't be helped. There will always be people that we can't save who commit these felonies.
Can't have heroes without villains, after all.
But I guess my point is that if it is able to be stopped, we have to nip it in the bud. For every single criminal I've told you about, no one else was the cause of their destruction. That's on them. But what about the people who are doing okay? Doing great, and others decided to step in and ruin it? What about the people who are given a motive on a silver platter by other human beings?
Oh, Shota thought. So this is where the second type of motive comes in.
I still don't get it.
The girl said, and the others nodded in agreement, but not to worry, they will soon.
Yeah, I figured as much. My phrasing can be quite messy at times, so I'll put it in simpler terms. The first kind of motive was for the sake of others, but the second, the more depressing kind, is because of others. You may be thinking that those are the exact same thing, but I promise you they're not.
Midoriya then hit a button on his computer, causing the screen to shift to the next slide, where a long bulleted list was projected for everyone to see. The list had almost every kind of discrimination a person could think of, and then some. Sexism, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, religious prejudice, classism, and even lookism. And that's just a small portion of it.
As you can see, it's quite a long list, but these are what make up the base of the second type of motive. Since I'm running out of time, I'll focus on the one that's become the most prominent in this day and age.
Another computer button was hit, and a bright red circle formed around the word quirk discrimination. The underground hero smirked. He was more than a little excited to see his secretary confront today's controversy about quirks. And UA students and staff of all people were probably the ones who needed to hear this the most.
It shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us about the prejudice towards, quote-unquote, villainous.
Midoriya put bunny ears around the word, and the erasure hero had to suppress a snort at the glare the kid shot Vlad.
Or mutant quirks, nor the favoritism towards what are called heroic quirks. But in case it was, I'll provide some statistics to show you how it exists.
Another press on the keyboard, and suddenly there were 5 charts projected on the screen. Those with villainous quirks were arrested 5 times more than those with innocent or heroic quirks. Those with mutant quirks have an unemployment rate 8% higher than others. People with villainous and mutant quirks are 10 times more likely to experience abuse at a home from a family member. The wage gap between them and the people with heroic quirks is 72 cents for every dollar. And finally, people with villainous or mutant quirks are far more likely to experience in-school bullying. Doesn't Shota know it? He grew up with all the kids staying as far away from him on the playground as possible, with teachers purposely staying behind him with a watchful eye. They isolated him, and they did that to make sure he could never see them, and by default, never use his quirk on them. He thought it was normal as a kid, that it was the right thing to do to him. After all, he had a villainous quirk, didn't he? Just a single glance could erase a person's quirk, one of the most important things about them. When he reached middle school, he realized it was pretty fucking stupid. But whatever, he digressed. He told himself it was just prepubescent teens being prepubescent teens, and that sooner or later they'd grow out of their immaturity. Even if that immaturity was cruel enough to make them force a blindfold on him in a dark alley after school. But then he handed in his high school application sheet to his teacher and got the loudest laugh he'd ever heard when the teacher saw the words UA in the first slot. Pretty degrading, if he's being honest. When he reached high school, UA, to be specific, suck it, Hachiro-sensei, and things were better. Not okay, but better. They might have been the first place with serious anti-bullying rules, but still, isolation didn't count as bullying if there was nothing explicitly verbal or physical involved. Somehow, the hero course was worse, though, with students and agencies whispering behind his back why he would even bother joining if he would be better off as a villain. And they were real smart about it, too, disguising all of their insults with passive-aggressive, friendly advice from your seniors. He never let it get to him, though. He'd built up some pretty strong mental walls by that point. He also had friends for once in his life, so yippee for a small support system. Although, when he told Hisashi all of this, the loud blonde said he needed some serious therapy. But whatever. One thing was for sure, though, and that's that they never grew out of it. It wasn't a teenage thing. It was a society thing. One he'd come to accept after hearing it from fellow pro heroes and police officers. Well, at least he thought he did. Then he became the temporary principal and realized that he could strangle prejudiced fools with his scarf if he so decided. Oh, and solve it in the politically correct way too, of course, but he mostly enjoyed the scarf thing. All in all, it sucked. And he'll be damned if he lets it happen to anyone else in this school when he had a chance to prevent it. When he and Midoriya had a chance at preventing it. As you can see very clearly, there is still a gap in equal rights between those with quirks that society considers ugly and villainous, and those with quirks deemed acceptable or heroic. Sadly, there isn't much we as a student body can do to help the first 4 charts, but the 5th one we might still be able to. A boy with silver hair shot up, cutting his green-eyed student off mid-speech. For the love of God!
Excuse me, but I don't really see why this is a problem.
Is he for real? Shota was about to glare at the kid when a quiet scoff drew his attention. The tired man turned to his left to see an equally as tired kid? What the hell? How did Shinso get back here? Jesus, those stealth lessons really are paying off. But still, the lavender-haired kid had a scowl on his face as he balled the fabric of his blazer into a fist, a clear sign of frustration. Not that he can blame him. The underground hero was about to check in on the kid when Midoriya started speaking again.
Oh?
No, yeah, that's anger. His student is angry. Dear God, spare no mercy of the Metallica kid. He deserves it at this point.
And why is that?
Those charts are like that for a reason. those things get treated like that for a reason.
Well, shit. Now Shota's angry. And if his eyes weren't failing him, a lot of other teachers and students were too.
Of course, we wouldn't treat them the same way we do as others. They're dangerous. Their quirks are a risk to anyone around them, and if it were up to me, they'd be locked up or kicked out by now. Better on the streets than in our homes.
Shota knew there were two options for what could have happened next. 1. Midoriya stays civil and presents them with reasonable logic and facts to try and convince them otherwise. Or 2. He goes rabid and tears their entire life apart. So, of course, the kid chose secret option number 3. Both.
Yeah, no. That's literally so stupid I don't even know where to begin.
Shota heard a snort from Bakugo. Huh, now that's a first.
So I'll start with what I hope will get through to your hard-headed brain. You think these charts are justified because these villainous and mutant quirks are dangerous? Well, newsflash, all quirks are dangerous if you're smart enough to figure it out. Should I give you a few examples? Okay.
The kid pulled out his notebook, paused for a second, then closed it, and Shota didn't know if he should be relieved that he's going off script or really excited.
Who's your favorite hero?
Midoriya asked innocently, giving nothing about his inner turmoil away. Well, he should give the rest of his class some acting pointers too, 'cause right about now it seems like a useful skill.
Endeavor?
The silver-haired kid offered. Ugh, typical. The erasure hero thought with a scowl. He vaguely noted that Todoroki did the same. God, he knew that was a cause for concern.
The guy who has the ability to burn a man alive since he was 4 years old? I'm not even surprised. Hey, ever heard of the villain Dobby? 'Cause he can do the exact same thing.
Oh, so that's what he's planning. The underground hero smirked, ignoring the choked snort he heard from the Todoroki kid.
Why? That's not fair. He's a hero. He's strong. He uses his power for good. Dobby is a murderer whose only goal in life is to be destructive.
Blah, blah, blah. Whatever. Doesn't change the fact that his quirk is dangerous. Shouldn't he be, as you said, locked up? And if circumstances were different, Dobby could have used his powers for good too, right?
Well, fine, if you're gonna be like that.
The silver-haired kid thought for a second before continuing.
Mirko!
One especially powerful kick to your spine and you're paralyzed for the rest of your life.
Hawks!
Oh, I've got a lot for this. He can telekinetically control each individual feather, but he only needs 2 to stab your eyes out. And don't even try and say he wouldn't do that, because I'm pretty sure all of us have seen the video where he wielded his feathers like a freaking sword. Who else uses swords? Stain.
Mountain Lady?
Any photos you've seen of the aftermath of a hurricane, Mountain Lady could probably do the same, and more, and worse, in a few minutes.
He hadn't noticed it before, but most of the kids and teachers were hiding their laughs behind their hands at this point. Except Vlad, of course, because for some reason he just feels the need to be the worst all the time. Why were they even hiding their laughter at all? In Shota's opinion, they should make it as loud as possible. Do the maximum damage to the Tin Can boy's ego. Speaking of Tin Can, he was looking pretty red with anger. Might as well be steaming at the ears. With what appeared to be the last of his fight, he said the only thing he could.
All Might!
Shota didn't know what he was expecting to happen, but it was something along the lines of Midoriya ignoring the name and continuing on like the boy had said nothing. After all, it was a low blow for multiple reasons. All Might was the symbol of peace, the former #1 hero, Japan's golden boy, and most importantly, Midoriya's all-time favorite hero. It was gonna be hard for the kid to try and pass him off as a potential villain, and clearly, Midoriya's friends and All Might himself agreed. Or so they thought.
He could cripple me with a flick of his finger. Now, are there any other lame excuses you want to bring up, or are you done?
Silence.
Good, because I was hoping to wrap this little argument up. What does society define as villainous if all quirks have the potential to be dangerous? What kind of idiotic checklist do they use to create these double standards?
Midoriya was getting louder and more frustrated with every word when he pointed at the boy.
And you! Them and their quirks aren't the problem. It's people like you who are too stubborn to see past their prejudice. That kind of thinking is what causes these people to get hurt. Do you even know what kind of treatment you're enabling by continuing on with that train of thought? No? Then I'll tell you.
Oh, this is the part his ulterior motive was waiting for. Shota clenched his fists in anticipation. Just a little more.
Let's start with what I was going to say before you interrupted. In-school bullying. Day in and day out, these kids that have what you call villainous quirks are forced to go to school and deal with people who are immature enough to have the same thought process as you. They hear people whispering insults behind their back. They have people tripping them in the hallways and vandalizing their desks.
Midoriya's hand, still outstretched and pointing, began to quiver ever so slightly, but it made all the difference to Shota.
They get laughed at for every little thing that they do. Their classmates illegally use their quirks on them as just another way to make them feel pain, as if the verbal abuse wasn't enough. They have people taking their most precious belongings and ripping them to shreds before throwing them out of windows.
The underground hero sighed. He knew it. The kid was speaking from personal experience. The passionate conviction in the kid's voice began to melt into something more cold and detached.
They have no one to rely on during this, not even friends, because of course they don't. No one would become friends with them just to live with the constant threat of facing the same abuse. Others are scared at both the idea of being near them and the idea of living the same life as them. No one believes in them, and no one ever will. They're alone.
His student's voice cracked, ever so slightly, not that anyone else noticed. This was worse than he thought.
Eventually, all this becomes too much. They get sick of the constant abuse, the constant use of the word villain wherever they go. So you know what they do? They stop fighting. They stop trying to ignore the hate because no matter what they do, no one will believe them. So for once in their life, they give in. They become a villain and they wreak havoc among the people who made them this way, among the society that let it happen. You know why? Because they know that the best revenge is proving their tormentors right and making them wish that they were wrong.
Okay, well, now Shota himself is a bit stumped. He wants to deny the claim. He's sure a lot of people in this room do, but the sad part is that the kid is completely right. He didn't become a villain. He was too spiteful to do that. But he'd be lying if he said he never considered it. Considered just letting go, that is. As you can see, he didn't, but he still remembers how much satisfaction the thought of doing so gave him. Just a little bit less than becoming a hero. Unfortunately, that's just him. There are millions of other people who weren't as lucky. People who lived their lives exactly as Midoriya described it. The thing is, Midoriya wasn't done. Deep down, they didn't want this. All they wanted was to live a happy life, free from the judgment of others. But as I said, there was no one to help them get that life. No one at all. So the next time someone tells a kid like them to take a swan dive off a roof and pray for a better quirk in their next life, there won't be anyone there to talk them down. Once again, the room fell into a stunned silence. The more sensitive of the students and teachers had tears forming at the brims of their eyes. Others looked angry at the thought of such injustice. Shota himself was just as angry, but not just at the inequality. He was mad at himself for not knowing how deep Midoriya's scars cut. The kid looked like a wreck, to Shota, at least. His eyes were wide as if he was equally as shocked at his speech as everyone else was. His chest was rapidly moving up and down, showing the signs of what might be the early stages of a panic attack. His arm was still shaking as he directed it at the silver-haired boy, who looked pretty regretful right about now. But worst of all, he just looked so sad, so tired. He just poured his heart and soul out into his speech, after all, and no one but Shota knew about it. Or at least he thinks so. Shinso was staring incredulously at Midoriya, no longer scowling or glaring or clenching his fists. In fact, he could say that his eyes looked a bit awestruck, hopeful, and inspired, even. The same could be said for Todoroki, too, as well as other students, but one, in particular, was quite strange. Bakugo. It's like he couldn't decide whether his complexion should be pale as a ghost or sickly green. Either way, he looked like he was about to throw up from terror. He'd been expecting this reaction from some people, but Bakugo? It's one hell of a shock. And if he really thought about it, he could say the kid looked guilty. Guilty for what? It's not like he did anything bad, right? Actually, didn't Bakugo go to the same junior high as Midoriya? His student cleared his throat and schooled his expression.
As I was saying, clearly it's very bad, and that's just one kind of discrimination out of many. Not one of them deserved what happened to them, no matter what anyone else says. And I hope this answers all of your questions about the second type of motive, because of others. These motives could have been prevented if the people around the person were just a bit more mature and open-minded and just less of a jerk in general. So going forward, I must ask the final question. What steps will you take to be a better person, prevent the preventable motives, and make society a better place for all of us? A place where we no longer have to deal with the torment that is discrimination.
No one said anything, but their silence was all Shota's student needed to know that he had moved all of them and made his point. Midoriya then smiled for the first time in what seemed like ages and gave a boyish thumbs up to the crowd.
My name is Isuku Midoriya. Thank you for listening to Social Awareness Day's Villain Psychology.
Isuku sat cross-legged on the floor, just outside the auditorium's back exit doors, twiddling his pencil between his hands. He wanted to write, analyze, plan anything, but he just couldn't. He couldn't stop thinking about what his junior high teacher said all those years ago, that his notebooks were just a way to distract himself from reality. He told himself that wasn't true, that it was just his teachers being rude again, but now he thinks they might have been right. His reality was horrible. He started off his speech with just basic facts that anyone could assume, but the more he spoke, the more he realized how familiar it sounded. And from that point on, he was just listening to the daily schedule of his own 13-year-old self. He honestly doesn't know why he's so shocked right now. He knew his life was bad. He was quirkless, after all. But saying it out loud really put it into perspective. Could those people have been him? The criminals? If All Might hadn't told him he could be a hero that day, would he have become a villain? When growing up, he knew being a hero was the only option for him, no matter how unrealistic it was at the time. If he didn't become a hero, he didn't have a backup plan for anything else. But does anyone ever really plan to become a villain? It's more of an in-the-moment thing that happens after a desperate psychological snap. But he didn't snap. He might have, but he didn't. Truth be told, he came pretty damn close. His teacher exposed him, his classmates laughed at him, Kacchan destroyed his notebook and told him to kill himself. That's mean. Why is he just realizing how mean that is? He almost got killed by slime. All Might told him he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. Other heroes yelled at him when he tried to save Kacchan, and it was really freaking hot outside. If All Might hadn't confronted him later and chosen him to take on One for All...
Hey.
Isuku's head snapped up at the voice, coming face to face with a bored Shinso. Or at least, he thinks he was bored. His hands were fidgeting a tad bit more than usual, and he looked quite nervous.
Hi. I heard your speech. It was good.
Huh?
It was really, really good.
It was such a short phrase, and a weird one at that, but Shinso still looked conflicted.
Thank you? Sorry, wait, are you okay?
The purple-haired boy's eyes grew wide as he fumbled for words. Wow, this is incredibly awkward.
No, actually, I'm not. Your speech was great. It was accurate too, way more accurate than I would have expected from someone with such a powerful quirk.
Oh, so that's what this is about. Shinso didn't believe him. It's ironic if he's being honest. His whole life, people didn't believe him when he said he'd be a hero, and now people don't believe him when he says that they didn't. It's all very complicated, and the green-haired kid didn't even realize he was laughing and saying his thoughts out loud until the boy before him pointed it out.
What do you mean they didn't believe you could be a hero? A quirk like that, they must have been falling at your feet.
Isugu laughed again, much louder this time.
What are you laughing at? I'm sorry, really, I am. It's just that
Another wheeze. God damn it, stop it, Isugu!
Do you really think this is funny? Your quirk is constantly compared to All Might's. No one in their right mind would call it villainous. So what? Was everything you said up there a lie? Just some pity for people you can't even relate to?
Shinso's brows were furrowed as he spoke with a scowl. Oh, he's mad. Well, the jig is up, he guesses.
You're right. No one would ever call this quirk villainous.
This quirk, not my quirk. Because it isn't his quirk, it's All Might's, and he still hasn't done anything to earn it.
And I don't know what it's like to live with a villainous quirk. I'm not you. So I really can't attest to your experiences. I can only speak from my own.
Were his experiences honestly that bad, though? Or is this some cry for attention? Is he being dramatic?
Oh, and what might that be, hero?
Isugu gave a sad smile. There's no use in hiding it.
I was a late bloomer. Later than most people consider humanly possible. And most you'll see some kid develop their quirk at 5 or 6, but for me...
He paused, taking a second to consider if this was a good idea.
I got mine at 14.
The tired boy's eyes were wide as he let out a small gasp.
You... what? How is that even...
Shinso knelt down to be face to face.
Possible? I don't know.
He really doesn't. He doesn't know why All Might chose him to carry on his legacy. Did he even want this legacy?
Point is, I'm a living fluke. I had an extra toe joint in my pinky toe, one that's commonly found in quirkless people. So that, combined with the fact that I was the last in my kindergarten class to not have a quirk, I was classified as quirkless. And I lived that way for the next 10 years until...
Isugu powered up One for All in his index finger to make his point.
Oh, so in elementary school and junior high, people thought that you were... that. One of the strongest students in UA's hero course. A quirkless kid.
Isugu glared.
Don't say it like that. There's nothing wrong with being quirkless.
Shinso looked taken aback at the cold tone, immediately backtracking.
No, I didn't mean it like that. I know there's nothing wrong with being quirkless. It's just shocking, that's all.
The boy with prominent eye bags gave a lazy smile.
Guess I should be apologizing, huh? Must have sounded like a complete jerk earlier. It's okay. You were justified. I'd be pretty annoyed too if someone who didn't truly know what it was really like to begin with began spewing stuff like that on stage.
All Might once told him that he knew how hard it was to be quirkless, that he too was teased as a kid, but it wasn't the same. Not really. All Might had grown up during a time when being quirkless was more normal and less hated. Isugu felt horrible about the bitter remark resting on his tongue that day, but he couldn't help it.
No, not just for that. The sports festival too, and basically every single day after. I was always under the impression that you had it easy, just coasting through life carefree. Little did I know that you probably had it worse.
That didn't sound right.
Truthfully, I don't think I had it worse than you. I don't think we should even compare our hardships. Were they hardships? I don't know. I think it'd be best if we all just try to move on from it. Nothing comes from feeling sorry for ourselves, after all. Maybe you're right. Nothing good comes from pity, but I don't think we should move on. Huh? What happened to me? You? Anyone like us? It wasn't okay, so we shouldn't forget about it. If anything, we should confront it. Shinso, I hope you don't think I'm about to go hunt down my junior high teachers.
He got a snort at that, and Isuku counted it as a victory.
Nah, not that kind of confrontation. I just mean that we should probably talk it out. Work through anything unresolved. God, I sound so cheesy right now. I'm starting to sound like Mike Sensei.
It was Isuku's turn to snort.
But Mike Sensei isn't exactly wrong. Lately, I'm realizing that I can actually trust teachers at this school. Yue certainly is unique.
Yeah, he's got that right.
So, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take my teacher's invitation, and hopefully after that I can stop feeling pity and just feel happy.
Happy? Yeah, he liked the sound of that. Isuku flashed a small smile at the taller boy.
Well, in case Mike Sensei gets too cheesy for your liking, I'm always here to talk to.
Shinso paused for a second, ears turning a faint red and eyes widening by a fraction as it filled with an emotion Isuku couldn't place. But it left as quickly as it had come.
Yeah, like that statement alone was any less cheesy.
Shinso probably meant to laugh, but he still had something on his mind holding him back.
What is it? I'm gonna talk to Mike Sensei, and I'm going to get help, because let's be honest, I need it, but you need it too.
The green-haired boy tilted his head in confusion at that, signaling the boy to continue.
I heard your speech, Mito. All of us did. But I think I'm one of the only people who know the truth behind it. How it was basically just a retelling of your quirkless days. And if I'm right about that, then that means your school allowed all those horrible things to happen to you. That someone legitimately told you to take a swan dive off a roof. That's not okay. And no matter how much you deny it, I know that had lasting damage.
Isuku wanted to speak up, but Shinso wasn't done, and he couldn't find the right words anyways.
As I said, Yue is different, and I'm positive that the teachers here are different from the ones you had before.
Are they?
So, I don't mean to go all present Mike on you, but you need to tell someone, preferably a teacher you trust.
Shinso's eye flitted to the side, and Isuku heard a faint sound of a door opening behind them.
And I think we both know who that is.
With one last reciprocated smile, the lavender-haired boy was gone, leaving Isuku to sit alone and stare at the floor as he replayed Shinso's words over and over again in his head. Or at least, he thought he was alone. Heavy footsteps got louder, and he'd only noticed the presence of his teacher when the man was already kneeling beside him. Aizawa-sensei didn't ask why he was sitting there in the first place, instead giving him a few more seconds of silence before he spoke up.
You okay, problem child?
Problem child. What an accurate nickname that is right about now. Never gets a moment of rest before another crisis pops up before him. Is that what this is? Was he having a crisis? Or was he always having a crisis, deep down in the pit of his chest, in the very back of his mind, and he was just refusing to acknowledge it until now? Until someone finally caught up to him and told him he needed help, that someone could finally help him. Isuku got his answer a second later when a small drop of water splashed across the cold tiles underneath his feet. And suddenly, he was shaking, both hands clutched over his mouth as he choked back sobs and desperately tried to breathe in air through his clogged nose. His eyesight got all fogged with tears, and Yusuke became hyper-aware of just how tired he was. Finally, he controlled himself enough to be able to remove his hands by a few centimeters, just long enough to utter a few quiet words.
Aizawa-sensei, I think I need help.
And just like that, he was crying again. Choked sounds resonating through the empty hallway that he didn't even bother trying to cover up anymore. Not even a second had passed before Yusuke felt a small weight on his head, spread out through the center. It came, then left, then came again, and slightly shook the bush-like hair on his head. It took him longer than he'd like to admit to realize that his teacher was patting his head and ruffling his hair. Mostly because that small, comforting action paired with the words that came next was enough to send him into a second wind of sobbing.
I know, Yusuke. I know.
Howdy, fellow rats. Hope you enjoyed. Man, what a great ending to a chapter. Finally, the Green Bean Protection Squad can assemble and get this child to therapy. I love me some good angst. Also, little heads up that this upcoming week I have my finals, so I will probably ghost y'all again for a little bit. Gotta love that uni grind. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, feel free to leave a like or comment down below, because I always love hearing from you guys. And make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date with whenever I post. And as always, here's a little daily reminder, or I guess not so daily, to hydrate, not dehydrate, you fiends. And also, in case you haven't heard, y'all can find me unleashing my love of chaos on others over in the new Discord server made by Eleanor Elizabeth. The link will be down in the description, and I'd love to harass you over there. So, till next time, peace out, my fellow rats.